Right, everyone. The clock has gone.
Sorry, what's your matter?
Look, I'm now at a decent height. I've found a solution.
That's your big chair.
Right, it's 6 o'clock. I have seen Councillor Agley around, but I think we'll start. Is he just coming? Welcome, everybody. This meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. And as I said at the last meeting, remember it will be there forever and a day. So whatever you see, sometime say in 2 years' time, could still be looked at. A recording of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Attendees are required to wear face masks on entry to the building and meeting room, which may be removed when seated. Would everyone in the hall please ensure you have scanned the QR NHS COVID app poster with your mobile phone located at the entrance of the chamber? I don't know about anybody else, but I haven't. Would members and officers please remember to switch their microphones on when speaking and speak directly into the microphone, and switch microphones off when finished speaking. Reporting officers join the meeting using Teams. Use the hands up icon on your screen for questions and comments. Please turn your cameras on and microphones off. Surely that should, your camera's off, shouldn't it? No, but it is when not speaking. Yes, please turn your cameras off and microphones off when not speaking. Switch off mobile phones or place on silent mode. Start the meeting. Apologies for up. Apologies.
Yes, Chair, there's Councillor Good and Jarvid.
Yeah, can you answer Rangari?
The minutes from the last meeting, are they accurate? Meetings from the 18th of May, and are they accurate? Can I sign them?
I went through them, I was happy.
Right. And then the meeting on the 22nd of June, are they accurate? Yes, Councillor Hussain.
Chair, I actually wasn't present at the meeting on the 22nd, and I did send my apologies beforehand to the Labour Chief Whip and also copied in an officer. But the minutes state that I was actually present. This is on the 22nd of June.
Right.
Please, can they be corrected?
Yes.
Thank you.
They will be. Thank you. Chair's update. Report back on OSB references to the executive meeting 28th of June 2021. Public space protection order. The executive agreed the following additional recommendation: that the police, NOAA, Luton Homeless Partnership and other agencies be involved in discussions on how the order could be made more effective. at the executive meeting on the 19th of July 2021, anti-littering strategy, the executive agreed the following recommendations: to find some budget to seriously ramp up the education, publicity and enforcement of the strategy, to investigate whether the proprietors of fast food takeaways can be made to contribute to this budget. Chair's update. Disclosures of interest? None. Urgent? Oh, sorry, give me.
Oh God, my thing hasn't loaded. Oh, sorry, can I declare an interest in item number 7 as a director of the airport?
Likewise.
By profession, I'm a travel agent. Although I haven't got any peculiar, non-peculiar interest with London Luton Airport. I just want to declare that.
Thank you. Any urgent business? References from committees and other bodies?
None, Chair.
Right, we will. Do this 2 people on London on the board, do they have to leave, Angela, or can they stay for the meeting, for the report review?
On that point, I've actually checked with the council's monitoring officer, and he actually said, given that it's historical information, directors of LAL can be present. I can forward that information to you if required.
Right. We go to item 7, review of London Luton Airport annual monitoring report for 2020. David Gertler, you're going to do the presentation? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm David Gertler. I'm a planning consultant and I advise the local planning authority on applications associated with the airport. Online, you will see on the Teams meeting, you will see that there are some representatives from LOL, the airport operator, who prepare the annual monitoring report with contributions supplied by officers from the council as well. So they can answer some questions if you have them. You'll recall last year, I think, that for the first time following a request from Councillor Franks, the airport's annual monitoring report was reported to the OSB, and I suppose it was quite a lengthy report we provided last year. Hopefully my presentation this year will be shorter and simpler. I will read out the purpose just for those who haven't seen. So OSB, at its meeting on the 30th of July 2020, resolved that the airport operator's annual monitoring report for the preceding year, so that's 2020's year now we're going to look at, should be presented annually to the OSB. The report provides a summary of the key areas set out in the AMR and provides an opportunity to scrutinise the performance of the airport operator from a planning perspective against the terms of the Section 73 planning application. That was an application to vary a condition, and the legal agreements that was attached to that. So we're asking the OSB to look at this report and see if they're content with it. I would just say, since the report was written, the London Luton Airport Consultative Committee, which is made up of representatives from the neighbouring authorities, from interest groups, from the airport, has scrutinised, and there was quite a long debate and discussion on it. As a report, I think, I'm hoping I'm not misinterpreting it. There will be minutes of that meeting, but as a report, I think quite a few of the people present think that it is a very detailed report. Some consider it to be publicity for the airport, whereas if you actually read the report, it's an 82-page document. It covers the year 2020, so it covers COVID. And it has an awful lot of information in it, but it then also has links to other documents that the airport provides. So I hope people have had an opportunity to look at it. It has some really useful tables within it. And in my presentation, some of those tables will come up, but unfortunately, because it's in this presentation, they will be really small. So I do recommend that people look at the annual monitoring report itself. So the airport's annual monitoring report, it has to be produced. It's required by the legal agreement to be produced by the 30th of June each year. It was produced on the 1st of June, and it identifies and assesses the performance of the airport for the preceding calendar year. So this is 2020. The key point, I suppose, is that from March 2020, we suddenly hit COVID. The findings and conclusions of the annual monitoring report are presented to the consultative committee. That's the LAC, London Luton Airport Consultative Committee. That happened on the 19th of July this year. Quarterly monitoring reports are produced. They are really detailed, and the Noise and Track subcommittee of the LAC does consider those each time and gives quite a lot of scrutiny and discussion on those. It arises, the annual monitoring report, I think last year we told you, has been produced for donkey's years. In its current form, it's been produced since planning permission was granted in 2014 for the increase allowing up to 18 million passengers at the airport. And the legal agreement that goes with the decision notice actually specifies what is required to be included in the annual monitoring report. So at the consultative committee, when some people questioned if it is just a PR document for the airport operator, my response to that is it is a detailed document. It provides an awful lot of information. It cross-references with other documents, and it is specifically required to address points in the legal agreement. Sorry, I'm trying to get the computer to move the next page. I've moved one page too far. In the annual monitoring report, there is a key page at the very first page, well, the first table that appears in that report provides you with an awful lot of data. And in the report for OSB in front of you, this is in paragraphs 9 following. Key things to look at in that would be, again, I would reiterate, COVID struck. So a lot of the data this year is quite different to what was presented to you last year. So last year, we were virtually seeing the airport operating at 18 million passengers at its capacity. This year on that table, which is possibly too small for you to read, the airport didn't operate anywhere near that. Last year, it had 141,000 aircraft movements. This year, that was down to 65,000. So it's a significant drop. And I think you will see then in the rest of the report that that obviously has an impact, and it changes quite a lot of things. For instance, in terms of noise, one of the big issues last year was that the noise contours, which are controlled by a planning condition, were breached for last year and a couple of years before that. This past year, 2020, obviously that's not been the case because the number of aircraft movements have been so low, 55% down on the previous year. So both the night noise contour and the day noise contour for the summer period are well within the constraints set by the planning conditions. So in paragraph 9, it tells you of those movements. Paragraph 10 of the report then picks up on some of the other things. Even though COVID has hit things, the main operators at the airport are still Wizz, EasyJet and Ryanair. EasyJet, you can see, is quite a bit, quite a few percentage movements more than Wizz, quite a few percentage movements more than the next two operators. Whereas I think last year, when we reported to OSB, EasyJet and Wizz were about the same. There is a mistake in paragraph 10, and I'm really sorry. It tells you that the busiest movements by an aircraft, that is correct. That says it is the Airbus A320 was 27% of movements. The mistake is that I've put the Airbus A320neo was the next biggest. That is wrong. The neo stands for new engineered. It says there for you. So it's the new engine option. So it's the modern, quieter, more fuel efficient aircraft. The one it should say, unfortunately, is the A321, which is still an older aircraft. It's not the neo, it's the CO. So I'm really sorry. The A320neo would have been about the fifth most movements. So it is below all the other older engined aircraft. Let's move on to the next. This is the screen which you will find very difficult to read. So I would refer you to, if you haven't looked at the annual monitoring report, I would refer you to the tables in there. It is easy to see in the tables in there. The first table at the top left tells you that the vast number of aircraft movements are the kind of reddish colour, and that was passengers, significantly more than anything else. The middle table on the top tells you which were the busiest months last year, and obviously January and February COVID hadn't struck, so those were the two busiest months. The column on the right tells you which is the runway usage. And generally at the airports, planes take off into the prevailing wind, so they tend to be taking off towards the west. The two tables on the left under the circle provide you information about the annual noise contours, and they will show you that for the summer period that the airport operated significantly within the constraints that are set by what is condition 10 on the planning permission. So the paragraphs to look at in the OSB report are paragraphs 15, 16, 17 and 18. And so they tell you that for the paragraph 15 tells you about the daytime contour, and the key figure there is a 57 decibel noise contour. The restriction is that shouldn't exceed 19.4 square kilometres, and for 2020 it was 12.2 square kilometres, so it was significantly below. Whereas you recall the previous year, 2019, was the first time the day contour was breached. Paragraph 16 is about the night noise contour, which is a lower contour, a 48 decibel contour, and they are constrained to 37.2 square kilometres. The actual size for last year was 28.8 square kilometres. I apologise if I'm peering. It's the first time I've been in the office for 18 months in the council, and I completely forgot my glasses. They were not in my computer bag, so I'm sorry. So you can see that on the noise contours, one of the big issues last year that we reported on was the breaches of condition. This year that isn't the case, but you'll see in paragraph 18 that I say there is a planning application that was submitted this year, 2021, so it won't appear in the annual monitoring report, but this year there is an application to vary the noise contours because the airport has been in breach, and obviously if things pick up again, there is the potential for that breach. So there is a ongoing planning application which hasn't been determined, and I don't propose to discuss it. It will go to Development Management Committee some point in the future. On that screen in front of you, the middle table is providing you information about the annual movement by aircraft type. So that's the one where I've told you I've had to correct that figure about the A320neo being the second most frequent aircraft. That table, if you look at it in the annual monitoring report, you'll see the other aircraft, the other 4 types of aircraft above it. And then the final table on the right-hand side on that screen shows you the aircraft movements and what are called quota count limits. So not only is the airport constrained by noise contour controls, and it's constrained by the number of aircraft that are allowed to fly in the night period, in the early morning shoulder period. It also has what's called a quota count, where each aircraft is given a rating based on the International Civil Aviation Authority certification. And the quota count, basically, if you have quieter aircraft, you can fly a lot more of those. If you have what's called a QC2, that's basically double a QC1, and that quota count would mean you can have less aircraft of the noisy variety. So they are constrained by that, and they were well within the quota count requirements. But again, COVID, but each year they've been within the quota count requirements, but this year it is massively below. So that's those tables. So the summary of what they said was only 45% of the figure for 2019 in terms of aircraft movements, so they were 55% down. Track performance is something that's quite key, that they have noise preferential routes to follow, and the annual monitoring report tells you that they performed 99.6% success on that. There are justifications for being off track. Air traffic control can direct a plane off track, or thunderstorms and bad weather can force a plane to be on a different track. So 99.6 was the same as last year. Airspace change, in the OSB report, you will see that there is a section on the airspace change in paragraphs 24 following. That is something which is run through the Civil Aviation Authority. It is different to planning, but it is of interest. They have 2 different airspace change proposals going on at the moment. One is a big one, which is called Future Airspace for the South, and that covers all the airports in the southeast and south of the UK. That obviously got put on hold because it wasn't a key priority for airports trying to deal with the pandemic. There is a more local one to do with Luton, which is trying to separate the aircraft that go to Stansted and Luton, which get held in 2 stacks together. That one is progressing, and if you go to the Civil Aviation Authority's page, you'll see that it's moved on in 2021, and it's expected to carry on with the consultation in 2021. In terms of passengers, you can see how low that was compared to the 80 million that we were reporting to OSB last year, 5,472,000 passengers. So again, that's only 30% of the figures that we reported last year. And then there are just 2 positive things that I report there, which appear in the annual monitoring report. Airport health accreditation program. It was the first airport in the UK to get that certification. That's ACI's Airport Council International. And then the other one is Airport Carbon Accreditation Program. The airport has, in terms of sustainability, the airport has published its responsible business strategy. And I provide quite a bit of information on that because last year we were a bit critical about the airport's reporting on sustainability. And this year in the annual monitoring report, there is more information on that. You'll see the figures for employment are not dissimilar to 2019. The council provides information on employees and in skills and stuff like that. The 11,200 employees includes furloughed staff. So, you know, at the start of the year, there were 11,200. That's what we reported from the annual monitoring report last year. That is the same figure being reported in 2020. 2021, we'll have to see what appears in the annual monitoring report. I've told you that daytime and nighttime noise contours were controlled. They didn't exceed the caps. They didn't breach any of the planning conditions. There is an interesting section, and it comes up every time at the LAC and at the Noise and Track Subcommittee, and it appears in the quarterly monitoring reports and in the annual monitoring report on complaints. And you'll see that they had 4,489 complaints, which is only 45% of last year's figures, but obviously there were less planes flying. It is amazing that of the complaints, 2 people are responsible for 52% of the complaints that are received. And when you get to Harpenden, I think 1 person is responsible for something like 75 or more % of the complaints that arise from Harpenden. So constant clicking and complaining distorts the figures. And I think at the LAC, at the consultative committee, some of the councillors from other local authorities are going to try and encourage people to be responsible in the way that they do, so that it doesn't distort the figures. People have a right to complain. There are valid complaints that come in about different aircraft. It's useful for the airport to actually follow up, and they respond to that, but it can get distorted. As you would expect, the different pollutant levels were lower this year. Significant numbers of people not travelling. The only corollary to that, I suppose, is that unfortunately in terms of surface access, so paragraphs 26 following in the report, when the government brought in the lockdown measures in March last year, they introduced restrictions, and obviously buses and trains had social distancing on them. They encouraged people to travel by car. So obviously the number of people turning up in private cars has increased percentage-wise, has not increased physically in terms of numbers, because you're looking at less than 6 million passengers compared to 18 million passengers the previous year. But I would say this is one disadvantage for us in terms of looking at the annual monitoring report for this year, is that a lot of the data has been completely skewed by the COVID pandemic. So whereas we want to see more people using public transport, and we want the public transport accessibility to the airport to increase, and 2022, the DART should start running. That won't appear, unfortunately, in the 2021 annual monitoring report, but hopefully things like that will see changes. But because of COVID, we've obviously seen in the annual monitoring report that the number of people using public transport has decreased significantly, and the number of people percentage-wise, and the number of people percentage-wise using private car has increased significantly. So in the report, I haven't covered it, but in the report there's paragraphs 31 following talk about sustainability, and the airport has produced its responsible business strategy. There is information in paragraphs 33 following about employment and supply chains, and the airport operator works with the council on those. Obviously, some of the events that you would have hoped to have seen, taking on apprenticeships, providing additional, going into schools, working the Prince's Trust, those kind of things, because of COVID, that's all been hit this year. But they are, so reporting for us, when the airport puts its key performance indicators, there are certain things that you would hope would increase and that they'd hit those targets, but some of the things have had to be put on hold for a year. One of the ones which I don't think I mentioned is the noise insulation programme. In the consultative committee has a subgroup which looks at properties in the surrounding boroughs and in Luton, surrounding districts and Luton for noise insulation. 240 something properties were approached, 43 were allocated to have noise insulation. That's in the first quarter of 2020, and then COVID hit and people were not keen on unknown contractors coming into their house, and the subcommittee and people didn't know what was going to happen with COVID and with working and contractors. You'll have seen on programs like Grand Designs, lots of work stopped in that period. So basically, the subcommittee of the LAC decided to postpone the noise insulation scheme for 2020. So properties haven't been insulated. That has resumed again. I just go. So just to compare to last year, in terms of key considerations, there's been no breach of the nighttime or daytime summer noise contours. Night flights have been well under the figures that have been set. The Planning Permission restricts them to 9,650. They were half of that number. Early morning flights in that first hour were significantly under as well. That's restricted to 7,000. That was 2,500. So going forward into 2021's annual monitoring report, I'm sure there will be a report covering what's happening with the planning application for the 19 million. That will come to a development management committee sometime this year. I'm sure they will advise that they've produced a carbon reduction plan. That is available to view in the planning application that's being considered at the moment. I can't remember if the 2020 annual monitoring report mentioned the master plan. I don't think it did, but we can check with the airport. There was a master plan produced for the airport in the back end of 2020, I think it was. So that should get covered going forward. The noise reduction strategy, the airport has an application currently in to try and reduce the noise levels, and by 2028 it is expected noise levels should be reduced. And then this airspace change, the one that's called AD6, which is the airspace change that covers the two stacks that relate to the Luton and Stansted. There should be further progress and reporting on that. The major one for the south of England, there will be further information on that, but it will be a much slower process because it covers so many more airports. So my personal view on the annual monitoring report was that it's more detailed than we've had in previous years. It met the requirements of the Section 106 legal agreement. And it's provided the council with the information that is set out. That legal agreement is 280 something pages long, and it has a variety of schedules which actually tell you what should be in the annual monitoring report. And then because of COVID, it's been a disappointing year for us in terms of being able to see changes at the airport that were progressing well. We were hopefully seeing in previous years more passengers using public transport. The airport set itself key performance indicators. It had got consultation targets lined up for different things, but COVID has really messed a lot of that up. So it is disappointing. And 2021, we've obviously still seen restrictions for the last 5 or so months, only coming out in the last month or so. So 2021's annual monitoring report will be different to the 2020. And unfortunately, I would imagine that there will be certain criteria, such as the public transport, again, that hasn't achieved what we would desire as a council and as officers to see happening with more sustainable, less reliance on private cars. I can't say what will be the noise contours will look up, because obviously what is happening currently is the government is relaxing restrictions, and yesterday it was announced, or yesterday or the day before it was announced, that British Airways, not at Luton, but say at Heathrow and Gatwick, plan on increasing their rate massively compared to this, compared to the COVID period. But that still is only 45% of the flights that they were operating last year. So until things improve in terms of vaccinations and dealing with COVID, I imagine next year's report will, we may have seen numbers increase, but it won't look like previous reports for, say, 2019 and 2018. So that concludes this one.
Thank you, guys, for the presentation. Are there any questions?
Yes, please, Chair. First, I'd like to say I found the report actually to be quite comprehensive, so I wouldn't in any way question the report. And of course, it's in a period which is difficult for the airport, as we understand. However, given the situation in the year that the report is talking about, it seems to me that the airport has still failed to meet a number of its targets. It hasn't introduced the same level of quieter aeroplanes that was being requested of it, if I understand correctly. I understand what you said about the numbers of passengers arriving by private transport. I see nothing to suggest at the moment that that will change. I was quite surprised that the report said that the level of reduction of passengers was as little as it was. I thought that I was going to see a much bigger number. Perhaps that changes as we go into 21. I don't know. So all in all, I'm surprised that actually there were any serious breaches, and any breaches of things like the noise limits and so on, and yet I see that there is. I'm disappointed to see that anybody would be considering moving forward with an expansion application until we see how the airport develops again. So report I like, because it's given me a lot of detail. It still fills me with dread as to what the next report is going to say, because I am not convinced, based upon this history, and we're all told that we should pay attention to history because otherwise it will just repeat. And I think that we're headed towards a significantly worse set of reports, both in terms of numbers, and as the airport grows, we will just go back to huge levels of breaches of all of the noise contours and noise limits. And they've been made worse, not so much for Luton, but for some of our neighbours. They've been made worse by the change of contours, of which I know the airport itself doesn't have much control, but they have made the noise issues worse for some areas, particularly, for example, Harpenden and St Albans. I know those are not the airport's making, but they will carry on into next year. I'm going to stop at that point, Chair. I could carry on for ages on this, but I don't wish to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Councillor Franks.
Yeah, just a couple of points.
You won't.
I mean, the first thing is A question around passengers arriving by public transport. The percentage of numbers arriving by public transport won't have been improved by the fact that during 2020, National Express coaches ceased to operate to the airport. I guess the question is, have they started again? And if not, is there any idea of when they're likely to?
Chair, could I suggest that someone like Neil Thompson or Ollie Jaycock from LOL answer the questions on that? That's obviously an airport operator issue.
If we could have a written answer and then Andrew pass it. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. One of you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, there was a number of points there. So good evening, everyone. I'm Neil Thompson. I'm the Operations Director for the airport. So pick up the points that the first councillor made. So the airlines still very much are modernising their fleets. We still saw fleet roll out last year, even though there was, for a period of time, there were no commercial movements at all. So I think we're still working with our main carriers about incentivising the newer, quieter generation of aircraft. So that's still an important consideration. I think another point I'd like to make is that we didn't breach any of our planning conditions last year. So there was actually no breaches at all. I mean, we were well within all of our limits. And we continue to work with our operators to deliver the quietest, the most efficient aircraft that are available. So I think it's just important to stress some of those points. I mean, Ollie can probably pick up the public transport question better than I can, but I'd like to confirm, National Express have started operating again now, even though they didn't for a period of time. Ollie, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think you're right, Neil. National Express and Arriva have both begun operating to and from the airport again. Now there are passengers. And the only other thing to say, yes, David Girl is correct in that we saw a slight change to the turn-up profile with people using private vehicles, but that's to be expected in these unprecedented times. And we have every expectation that it will begin to return to public transport. And just to provide some reassurance, we're working very closely with both the coach and rail operators in making sure that we roll out reassurance campaigns to encourage people back onto public transport. And of course, with the DART activating early in 2022, then that's a real game changer for the airport. And I'm sure we'll see many more people using the airport coming via public transport.
And sorry, so there was another point I'd like to just pick up about the passenger number. So I think it's important to note that for the first quarter in 2020, we're almost at normal levels. So it wasn't until the back end of Q1 that passenger numbers started to drop off. And it's continued much longer than we ever envisaged. So this year, we're expecting a lower passenger number than we had last year. So I think it's just important to put all that into context.
Chair, if I can just also provide some comments for Councillor Wynne. Councillor Wynne, I know they said there weren't any breaches of planning conditions. I take it from the report that you were referring to two breaches, there were two noise violations, which were private aircraft. So that's not a breach of a planning condition, but it is it's a noise violation breach. So they were fined, and there is a system in place for that. And then there were 11 track violations. The fines actually go into the community fund. And one of the things I probably didn't comment on, which is in the report, is the amount of money that the airport put into the community fund, what that's been spent on, which charities have been supported, and it does cover charities in the surrounding local authorities as well. Going back to what Neil Thompson said about the aircraft type and the rollout, I would say that it's the same for all the airports. There have obviously been some difficulties with the delivery of aircraft. For instance, the 737 MAX has not been flying, and that's one of the quieter aircraft, and that's the one that Ryanair has got lots of orders for its fleet, for its modernisation, whereas EasyJet and Wizz use the A320 Neo and the A321 Neo. They have been upgrading those, as Neil Thompson says. There have been, from what I've seen in the aviation press, there have been issues with the manufacturers of some of the engines. There is also the fact that fleet delivery looks like it did, in my opinion, the airport operator might have a different view, but from what I've seen at other airports, fleet delivery has slowed down because obviously airlines have been looking at survival mode. And do you bring on stream this year the aircraft that you were intending to acquire when actually you've seen your profits massively reduced? So do you postpone it for a year or so? I've seen that at a couple of airports where I'm also involved.
Councillor Abbott? Oh, Councillor Abbott.
I'm not sure whether you want to call me or not. Thank you. I think you nearly touched on what I wanted to point out in terms of violation and infringement. I didn't think I understood the difference in the sense that if you look at page 29, the key monitoring indicators, the departure noise infringement was 2. I think there was none last year. To me, I don't understand if you care to expand what that means. And if people think, okay, I'm going to infringe this and pay the fine. So what was the effect when you said somebody's infringing on noise? What was the impact on residents around Luton? Because I represent Luton, so I want to know what that means, because I was going through the report and it never expanded on what that means. So if you care to expand, I'll be grateful. Thank you.
The airport operator might want to, but I'd just say it was 2 private aircraft. So the airport operator has worked with the airlines to make clear what the level in 2020 for aircraft arriving and departing changed, became lower. So they'd advised last year, I think we said in the OSB report, that this was coming in for 2020, and they advised the airlines, and they've been working with the airlines on that. So out of the 63,593 movements, there were 2 breaches, and those were private aircraft coming into some business jets coming into the airport. That's 2 out of 63,000 movements. But the airport operator, Neil, you might want to say what the implication is.
Sure, yeah, thank you, David. So yeah, we have 3 noise monitors around the airport, and we set noise, so we have a lower noise limit for the night time than we do for the daytime. And if aircraft exceed those limits, we fine them, and as David mentioned earlier, that money goes to a community trust fund. So this enables aircraft operators to design their procedures so they generate lower noise levels, they have a reduced power on takeoff so that they don't exceed these limits. So generally it does give us a quieter profile around the airport than if we didn't have any monitors in place at all. So that the scheme has worked, and we progressively lowered the limits over the last few years. So we have some of the lowest limits of any of the other major airports in the UK now. And so we've demonstrated it by only having 2 violations in the last year.
So in terms of, can I breach it 20 times, 40 times and just pay the fine, or you have to clamp down people who do the breaching? Yeah, so we have an escalation process for fines, but every operator, they're not happy to pay the fines. They regularly challenge the fines, and the fining system does work. So when you're operating, particularly with the low-cost carriers, where they operate on very low margins, very tight margins, a fine that we can charge the airlines if they exceed limits can mean that aircraft operates unprofitably. So it does have a massive impact on the aircraft operators, and they do, as we can see from the data here, they do generally adhere to the limits. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor, did you? Yes, and then.
Yeah, I want to come back to public transport, please. I mean, it's good to hear that National Express are back, and one can understand why they ceased operating because there was no business for them. But when the airport does eventually get back to what we used to call normal, a significant part of the profit of the operating company comes from car parking. I just wonder what they can say that will give us reassurance that they are serious about trying to shift more and more passengers from private cars onto public transport?
Can I just set one context for that? I'm involved with North Somerset Council at the Bristol Airport public inquiry. Bristol Airport has 18,000 something car parking spaces for an airport that operates at under 10 million passengers, whereas Luton on the 2012 planning application, so the 2014 planning permission, had about 9,650 car parking spaces associated with an increase to the 18 million passengers. So the airport does operate a system of price control, which discourages people from using public transport, and other airports do that. So Bristol does that as well. So if you raise your car parking prices, it may discourage people from using the private car. As you get better public transport links, people are encouraged to use that. The airport has a travel plan and a passengers and staff travel plan. So it does encourage and try and shift people in that direction. The DART project, which hopefully is due for opening in 2022, will provide a much better link and ease of access straight into the airport from Parkway. The number of trains has increased, I believe, with Midlands. So I think the airport Heathrow's got 42,000 car parking spaces for a 69 million passenger airport. Luton is quite good, and it was something back in 2013 when we took the application to committee. One of the things we did look at that committee was the number of car parking spaces, and our desire as a local planning authority to discourage people from using private car and encourage people to use public transport. And the airport has a surface access strategy which it reviews, which is produced for every 5 years, but it's got key performance targets. And we looked at that, I think, just last year with our highways department to see if we can encourage greater public transport use. But obviously COVID has impacted what we were hoping for. I don't know, Ollie, Chair, is the airport operator allowed to say anything further? Okay, Ollie, do you have anything on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, David. I think you provided a very comprehensive response. I think you're absolutely right. The airport does have a published airport surface access strategy that has very detailed plans and targets about how we will shift mode share and get people out of private vehicles and onto public transport. And I think my direct answer to Councillor Franks's question is, I don't think there's any better example of how committed the airport is by looking at that £260 million investment into the DART, which is solely about driving people out of their cars and onto public transport. And then, of course, as an airport operator, we also completely accept and understand that the long-term viability of the airport absolutely depends on the airport making sure that we're reducing emissions, and that's about getting people out of their private vehicles. So, yeah, I can assure you that we're very committed to that.
Can I come back on that? A couple of points that I think need to be raised here. First of all, by increasing the car parking charges at the airport, you're just as likely to encourage people to use the off-site parking, which is probably even worse than using the airport's own parking, because it then involves buses backwards and forwards from Slip End or wherever. On the question of the DART, I'm told that the trials of the DART system is currently going. Oh, and incidentally, of course, the DART isn't being paid for by the operating company. It's being paid for by the council's company with money borrowed from the council. So in effect, it's being paid for by taxpayers' money. Yeah, on the trials that the data, I'm told, are not going terribly well, and that on a few occasions it's actually come off the tracks because there's some problem with either the traction or the pulley system or the wheels. I've never got the detail of exactly what the problem is, but if it can't stay on its tracks, it's not going to make the contribution expected, is it?
I don't know if either the airport operator wouldn't be the right people to respond on that. That would be Lal, and definitely representing the local planning authority. I know nothing about that, I'm afraid.
I think all I will say for that is there's a good 9 months of testing before it opens. So if there are any issues, they should get ironed out before it goes into service next March.
Thank you. You've just answered my question, because when you said DART 2022, I was going to say, is it at the beginning, middle or end? But you're hoping it March next year, it will be in, actually in
the Q1 next year.
Well, approximately next March. Thank you.
Can I just respond to Councillor Frank's point around the concern that was raised just then? What we'll do is we'll get colleagues from Louth to do a formal response, because that's a serious issue that was being raised. Nothing that we have heard as officers. So we need to understand where that's come from. Obviously, we've got the chair of the Louth board here, and I wonder whether it would be appropriate for Councillor Hussain to respond to that. Well, just because it is a serious kind of issue that was raised in a public arena, and we kind of need to kind of understand what that means and deal with it outside of this meeting, but it can't be left just hanging there. Okay.
I was, yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
No more questions after that, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick question. Thank you very much for your comprehensive report anyway. A couple of years ago, until last year, we've been talking about mass transit plan, MTP, and then 150 million or billion investment, transformation of London Luton Airport, and stuff. But last couple of years, no, not a couple of years, but a year when this pandemic started, we did not hear anything about this. So I just want to know where we are standing in terms of that at the moment.
Sorry, Councillor, can I confirm what I think you asked? Last year, we talked about the investment that the airport had put into its development. Is that the 150 million? So that, I believe, would be what they call Project Curium, which was the expansion of the terminal, the new pier, which allowed the aircraft to get passengers to planes. That was the 2012 planning application granted in 2014. So that was the significant investment by the airport. The airport is still investing in other things. While I've been advising on planning matters for the council, the airport has done what's called Taxiway Foxtrot, which is a new taxiway virtually adjacent to Wigmore Valley Park, which has got de-icers in it. So the aircraft can taxi through there, and in the winter period they can be de-iced, and instead of the glycol and other contaminants sort of spreading and having to be separated subsequently, they're contained. That's been an investment. The airport has done some work to one of the taxiways associated with the DART project. The airport put in a consultation under as a householder has permitted development rights, the airport as a statutory undertaker also has permitted development rights, and they put in a consultation to determine whether they could provide 6 additional stands associated with the engine testing area. That hasn't been built yet, but I know that we confirmed as a local planning authority that that is permitted development. The government grants it at a national level. The local authority can only decide, does it meet the criteria set at the national level? So they are still investing in different things, but obviously the big investment I think that we reported on would have been Project Curium, which was the enhancements to the terminal and passengers area, including the pier. I don't know if Neil has any other comments on investments going forward.
Yeah. Thank you, David. So yeah, it was about £160 million worth of investment, and all that programme included the taxiways as well. So we extended 2 taxiways, or built a new taxiway and extended another one. So it was an entire programme of works that delivered the 18 million passenger project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a general point. I mean, since I've been back on the council, one of the things I've noticed is, we're talking about all this travel to the airport. I'm really surprised we haven't got an adequate park and ride scheme that the town's much needed. I have, mentioned in passing to fellow council, and they say we've got something in the town centre. I'm not sure that's adequate. With the travel and the private vehicle usage, we need a proper park and ride scheme. And I think some of the gentlemen said about emissions and that. We're moving towards electric vehicles. We need adequate parking schemes.
Thank you. No, sorry, I did say after. Sorry about that, but as I say, we've spent an hour on this and we've got another one which is fairly hefty afterwards. So thank you, gentlemen, for Gareth, first of all, for your presentation and for helping with the answers to our questions. Thank you, all three.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Provide any feedback on its presentation and content to help improve future reports in line with the requirements of the legal agreement. Have we got any other?
No, it might be worth including a thanks for the presentation.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
It was very helpful.
Yeah, maybe what we could do at the next year's presentation, Gareth, you know how you had that slide presentation. If we could have that before the meeting, that might help. Because as you say, it's a very detailed report, and having the slides that Gareth has produced this time, I think would help us all, wouldn't it?
To be fair, most of the stuff that we saw on the screen is actually in the monitoring report.
I know, but it's easier if it's all on one screen rather than going through and picking out the individual. That's the only thing that I would say. I think I would find helpful. Don't know about the rest of you. Yeah. Do you? Right. Thank you. Thanks very much. Very good presentation. Even without your glasses. Forgetting. Item 8, Heritage Strategy. Lily Smith, are you doing the presentation? Or is it a double?
It's a double act, that's okay. I'm going to open it and then I'm going to pass over to Lily. So, hi, it's Sinead McNamara. For those who don't know me, I'm Head of Policy, Strategy and Partnerships for 2040. So I'm just briefly going to set the scene and give you a bit of background to where we are. So as you all know, we were really successful with a bid to HLF, which has funded the Heritage Enabler role, which Lily is in, and the production of a 10-year heritage strategy, which Lily's been working on over the last 9 months. This links into our Luton 2040 vision and the inclusive economy strategy for transforming lives through arts, culture and heritage. I'm hoping that OSB has had a chance to look through, hopefully, the shortened version of the strategy or the big one. I'm conscious that the big one is very comprehensive, over 100 pages. I appreciate that there's a lot in there, but we felt it was really important to include everything and provide as much detail around the heritage of the town as we could. It's gone through an extensive consultation, including 2 rounds of public engagement, ranging from young people, community groups, and key stakeholders locally, and of course the general public. This has been through workshops, surveys, and a number of one-to-ones, and we've also taken some more detailed discussions with members and our key delivery partners. As we move to the final stages of the strategy, we're hoping that the OSB are happy with the recommendations, and Lily's going to go through those in a bit more detail with you. Just a couple of final points from myself. I just want to reiterate that this is a town-wide strategy, so the council is just one partner within this, and we're reliant on other delivery partners, for example, the Culture Trust and the university, to help us deliver this 10-year strategy for Luton. We've had some really positive feedback from Heritage Lottery Fund, and as we move from the strategy into the implementation plan, we will be submitting a large-scale bid into them in November, which we hope will fund the continuation of the Heritage Enabler and also deliver some of those key strands of work that we mentioned in the strategy. So what I'm going to do now is pass over to Lily, who's going to go through the report with you.
Hello. I was just going to upload onto the screen the shortened version of the strategy so you can see what I'm talking about as I'm talking. Let's see if I can be clever enough to do that. Right, can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you. We can, Lily.
Okay, thank you. So the Heritage Strategy is a 10-year plan from 2021 to 2031. So I'm just going to go through the shortened version so we can cover everything quickly. Both the short and long version cover the forward by Councillor Roche, the introduction, which is actually presented as the executive summary in the longer version, how we co-produced our Heritage Strategy, which I'll talk a little bit more about, the vision, and then we've separated out the different strategic priorities: placemaking, embedding diaspora and diversity, embracing digital innovation, conservation, preservation and valuation, improving prospects for young people, and our future proofing. And I'll talk a little bit more about those further. We resisted putting, because these strategic priorities came out of the public consultation and came out of looking at the priorities of our key delivery partners, our strategic partners, our key funding bodies, so that we're sort of dovetailing with all of that. We didn't put in health and well-being as a strategic priority, which we could have done, and it will come into absolutely every area of the heritage strategy. Then we look at the strategy framework and these emergent non-designated heritage interpretation zones. And this is because from the outset, I was, we were told, please don't have any more designated conservation areas. We would need to do heritage audits, and also they become statutory obligations. But what we do need to do is start to zone our heritage across town so that everybody can be engaged and so that we can connect people with place. And then we look at the joined up partnership approach to the partners that we've been dealing with. So obviously the forward by Councillor Roche. And then what would be the executive strategy. So we had 300 individuals who took part in our consultation, over 30 stakeholder groups, 10 representatives who then went on to be proactive in further consultation and testing of the local list and testing of holding other meetings. The whole consultation can be found through that link. One of the things that we found was we recognised our award-winning parks. Parks came out really high in our public consultation. There's lots of figures there as to really why, the economic evidence why we should anchor heritage. There's a sound economic reasons for doing that. So that's all about monetary and social return on investments. One of the things that we started to do was we looked at different types of heritage and how they can be preserved and protected, and also how we choose what we preserve. We're identifying a local heritage at risk register. So this is a dynamic process across all of our delivery partners, and basically that will just help us inform priority actions. There are national things that are listed at risk, but really that will inform our priorities. So we talk about the fact that it dovetails with our town centre master plan, our arts and heritage, our public art plan, other things across the town. This goes into a little bit more detail about how we produce the heritage strategy, public consultation 1, public consultations 2, community workshops, and then focus groups, stakeholder focus groups, and then input from key strategic and delivery partners. Some of the good things that came out of the public consultation, 66% of people said they'd never been engaged in heritage before, so that was really good. And 30 individuals wanted to be help in the review of local list, and 68 new people joined the Luton Heritage Forum. So, we had some wins from the consultation. Have you see from here, this was the percent of survey respondents by ethnicity in April. So in April, 69% of the respondents came from white ethnic backgrounds, and we weren't really happy with that. So we started to hold consultation groups. So within our African Caribbean communities, we held consultations with ACCDF and Heritage Alliance and the UK Centre for Carnival Arts. And then we engaged young people from Revolution Arts, and then we reopened the online survey for Luton Irish Forum and young people, and we increased our engagement with individuals within communities of Asian descent, and both within Luton Heritage Forum and one-to-one discussions around the strategy. So moving along down, we asked which kind of heritage was most important. And funnily, built heritage came out top, but when we started to combine things like cultural and intangible and other, and people cited community, those intangibles came out. So we're not going to prioritise one over the other. This again just helps us in our plans going forward. So the framework, one of the considerations I'm asking for feedback on is the actual framework and content. So we've got the strategic priorities, then we've got a very solid framework mapping our assets, and we split it into tangible, intangible, and this area where intangible and intangible collide. So we've got sections covering our natural heritage, our built heritage, our industrial heritage, our cultural and community heritage, and then our intangible heritage, where we look at heritage craft skills and we look at digital archiving. So I'm hoping that we've covered everything. And then we're looking at the developing 5 non-designated heritage interpretation zones. So what we mean by that is they're not nationally registered, so and there's no planning obligation, statutory obligation. They're very much about focusing our connectivity, our placemaking, and interpreting our heritage. And I will talk about those as well. Then our partnerships, and we've got our partners later on. So our vision is that Luton has a sense of place that is anchored through its heritage, and where well-being and civic pride are anchored through that, and that our identity as a proud, industrious, working class town, so we're a place of innovation and making, can be celebrated and sustained. And we have 6 strategic priorities. Placemaking is a government, seems to be a government buzzword right now, and it really just means the connectivity of people and place. Embedding diaspora and diversity. So this is the story of Luton. We are diasporic. It's a bit of a jargony word, but we're about influxes of economic migration and all sorts of other migration, and it's those stories that we need to embed in our heritage to make it work. Then we've got embracing digital innovation, and conservation, preservation, valuation is about how we choose what we conserve, how we choose what we value. The preservation is about our protective frameworks, and our valuation is actually how we value it towards Green Book valuations. So our built, our industrial, our natural already has a Natural England Green Book valuation. You know, our cultural, how we might go towards valuing those things. Improving prospects for young people, I think, goes without saying. It's very much twofold. It's about listening to young people's voice and also looking at how, for example, modular heritage apprenticeship might look. And then beyond sustainability, this strategic priority started life as sustainability, and quite rightly we were told, well, that's just not good enough. So maybe it should be called embetterment, but that's basically what it is: future-proofing and betterment. So the arguments for placemaking are civic pride, well-being, and economic regeneration. So we have target outcomes. So I'm looking for a view on the target outcomes. So for that strategic priority, we would be looking at going forward to have indicators around the fact that we will work in partnership to develop and deliver placemaking. And this will include community-style charrette workshops, and that's a French word, and it's like a workshop with an outcome. And so if we have a design charrette, they would become design codes, for example. We will develop a heritage fund to support artists, individuals, and community groups, and to support that. The strategy around embedding diaspora, our narratives, so that's really about place, our place, and our outcomes there are: we will work in partnership to widen participation, break down barriers to access. We'll work in partnership to embed diaspora and diversity narratives in all of our heritage implementation planning, and we will make best use of the demographics from this year's census that will come out in the future, because this strategy is set to be reviewed in 2 years' time. The strategy priority embracing digital innovation is about placemaking. It's about future-proofing, and it's about using digital innovation in conservation and preservation. So, for example, some of the data, that biodiversity data, for example, that we make decisions around our county wildlife sites and our natural heritage is up to 10 years out of date. So we're looking at developing a dynamic system to collect that data and analyse that data. And then digital innovation for sustainability and future-proofing, that's what that is about. The target outcomes there we will work in partnership to harness our digital and artificial intelligence. So in partnership, for example, means with the university. We will work in partnership to develop the use of GPS technologies to record and review our heritage assets across town. We'll work in partnership to establish a coordinated dynamic approach to data collection, and we'll work in partnership to use best practice digital archive management systems. Strategic priority conservation preservation is all about reviewing our museums policies, reviewing how we decide what we value and the frameworks we use to actually value, and that's across natural, built and cultural heritage assets. The target outcomes there will be: we will diversify our collections at Wardham House Museum and Gallery, and we will work in partnership to co-produce and update dynamic local lists and heritage at risk registers. So the dynamic local list is built environment, including public art, natural heritage, architectural features, and whole buildings that might not be on national registers but are valued highly by the local community. And then developing a dynamic at risk register will inform our priorities of work. We'll develop a steering group to lead on the review of all of that. We will support museum makers and other volunteer and community-led activities. And we will develop community and stakeholder groups to help collate the socioeconomic and cultural evidence that will support the major emergent projects. We will prioritise a partnership approach to the audit and valuation of our heritage assets using the government's Heritage Capital Framework. So I'll talk a little bit more about major projects later on. So a strategic priority, improving prospects for young people, is about giving young people a voice and about looking at skills and opportunities for young people, because heritage cuts across STEM, creative, everything really. So these opportunities might include, for example, conservation, building apprenticeships, natural heritage conservation apprenticeships, hat and block making, which cover a lot of engineering, more engineering, aviation, motor innovation, growing young people's engagement with creative enterprise and the connectivity within the hat districts. There's lots of scope there. Our target outcomes will be working in partnership to involve children and young people in the review of the heritage strategy and the development of the heritage implementation plan, because we realised that we did not manage to engage enough young people in the development of the strategy itself. I'm not going to sound like I'm making excuses, but that was largely to do with the COVID situation. We will make a commitment to work in partnership to develop formal apprenticeships. We will work in partnership with educational organisations to develop Ofsted accredited local heritage education resource packs. In future-proofing, we are looking at partnership working to embed measures to future-proof heritage in the heritage implementation plan. We'll work in partnership to promote intergenerational engagement, including skills, knowledge and collective memory heritage activity, and we'll develop greater infrastructure, governance, resources and heritage capital within the community, and that's something that National Lottery Heritage Fund very much support. So the framework for the strategy, in each area we list a national and local context and our natural heritage assets, the significance of our assets and how we protect the protective frameworks. And in each area there is a major project emerging. And then we've identified heritage at risk, and those two things will form the framework for the developing the implementation plan going forward. So the major project in natural heritage, the River Lee, the deculverting of the River Lee, Wardown Lake management, everything to do with the River Lee, basically. The heritage at risk, we've recognised that biodiversity of the rivers at risk. Affinity Water have been working on that. There's the Lee Park Partnership working on that as well, and the Conservation Board and the Wildlife Trust. Heritage at risk, also in natural heritage, we've identified our ancient monuments and archaeological features like glazed ditches because of road infrastructure. And things that are part-sited in private ownership, difficult to protect. Our lowland meadowland, which needs specialist management. So we have a lowland meadowland that's just had an SSSI designation, which is brilliant, but if we don't manage it properly, it's going to lose it because the biodiversity would change. And then intangible heritage, for example, our heritage craft skills, hedge laying. And when we talk about heritage at risk, we are not being we're being hopefully comprehensive, but it is a dynamic list, so it won't stand still. So recommendations in this area that the heritage interpretation of the River Lee is considered and embedded at every stage of capital planning for deculverting, so that our heritage is anchored in that, not an afterthought. The dynamic draft local list framework, which was attached, is developed to include those green assets that are not otherwise protected. You know, they're not county wildlife sites, ditches, wildlife sites, but they're really important. For example, there's a medieval earthwork in People's Park. That's just one example. There's lots of examples. That a local heritage at risk register is maintained across all of the categories. Again, that's a local list to inform priority of work. The developing heritage implementation plan includes action planning to prioritise the things that we've defined as at risk. The Stockwood Discovery Centre, Ian Hamilton Finlay Public Art and Interpretation Garden is listed, but it needs a management plan. We're looking for views around the recommendation that the development of a Stockwood Parkland master plan considers the historic parkland. It's one of 3 historic parklands in Luton. So that's your views are sought on that. That all partners commit to collectively addressing identified needs for coordinated biodiversity data collection. So we've been talking to the Conservation Board, the Wildlife Trust and our parks at LBC to look at how they can share. The calls for research there is engineering research around that. So we've been talking to the university about that. In built heritage, our major project is a new hat industry heritage zone. So we're looking at combining the Plattersley Conservation Area and Hightown Conservation Areas and the wider Hightown hat industry area and the station gateway as a hat heritage zone. And within that, there's potential for a future capital project or a feasibility study to look at the underground ward tunnel, perhaps as a visitor attraction by 2039, bit of forward thinking, that the Plattersley hat district will be supported within that. And then some of the built heritage at risk that we've identified. So within Hightown and Plattersea, that's identified naturally by English Heritage as heritage at risk. We've also identified that historic pubs, Victorian villas and certain group values of heritage assets remain at risk. So, for example, Art Deco style white residential houses, they're not at risk of demolition or at risk of not being white anymore or having permitted development that changes them, for example. We were looking at group values like, for example, workers' terrace cottages that are built with Bedfordshire blue brick. And I think here the examples are actually in Newtown. So, you know, where we're not saying we want to preserve all terrace cottages, but we want to preserve the use of the blue brick in those areas, for example. The facade of the former ABC cinema remains at risk, and the National Centre for UK Carnival Arts was very high score on the local list appraisal because of its social and cultural heritage value. And it's also in the middle of the St Mary's Quarter, which is a new emergent heritage interpretation zone. And I think the buildings, a lot of work going on with Arts Council, for example, looking at that building. Then hat industry skills are at risk. They're now on, as well as millinery, bookmaking and hat making are now on the National Heritage Craft Association Red List. And we would be, Luton, we would be the centre, the centre of hat making in the UK. And so if it's lost to us, it's pretty much lost to the world. It's now on a national list. The recommendations here that a full audit to identify all the buildings at risk connected with the hat industry be undertaken, that the draft local list framework is expanded to include those micro-architectural street furniture and designs, for example, ghost signs, that local list framework is expanded to adopt blanket group value properties, for example, the examples that I've given earlier. Local list doesn't necessarily on its own, you know, it doesn't have any direct statutory obligation or planning protection, but it's something to take into consideration. The recommendation here is that an at-risk register is maintained across all the heritages, that all strategic partners adopt the social return on investment valuation published this January by DCMS. This is on top of the natural heritage already has a Green Book methodology for valuing. I've got a recommendation here as well, a view on this at the town centre conservation area. So this is our designated heritage conservation areas listed with Historic England. The town centre conservation area be renamed St George's Conservation Area. And this was just to avoid confusion with the town centre master plan boundary. Because we've got a town centre conservation area and a town centre master plan. I think to members of the public might find the boundaries conflated, and that what is now the town centre conservation area is pretty much from Upper George Street to George Street West. So it seemed to call it St George's or George Street Conservation Area would make more sense. The recommendation also that all partners commit to collectively addressing identified needs. For example, we need a conservation officer, so that would sit in planning, and we need supporting the organisational infrastructure of community group development to help collect and coordinate conservation area audit data. Meanwhile, because we're kind of, I think in terms of inward investment from National Lottery Heritage Fund, for example, you know, we would be expecting over 10 years, you know, 5 to 10 million pounds from them. They would expect some commitment. We would be looking at having a commitment within, you know, 1 to 3 years or 2 to 3 years time at the review of the heritage strategy for a conservation officer, and that's a commitment that they could see. Calls for research there would be around built heritage evaluation case studies and how we can value that. In industrial, a major project is made in Luton, so positioning Luton internationally as the home of the Vauxhall Heritage Collection and positioning Luton as a site of engineering innovation and excellence, which it has been historically and continues to be. So the heritage at risk that we've identified is the Vauxhall Heritage Collection and hat industry related crafts and collections, social history and collective and individual memories. So our recommendations is that the museum's collection policy and collections development plans are reviewed to address that. To recognise the airport as a site of heritage. So you've just heard about, the airport, but the airport is a site of heritage, and also to recommend to urgently record social history memories related to industrial heritage. And in cultural heritage, our large project emerging is placemaking. It's a plan, it's a strategy, it's another strategy, but it's about curating Luton, which is the title of the strategy, is really the heritage interpretation and placemaking plan. So it's looking at that as a 2-year, first of all, a development piece of the Heritage Lottery Fund are keen on us putting in a bid to develop and then to deliver. So that would be over a 5-year period. That is all about connectivity, connecting people and place. And then our cultural heritage at risk, again, we've talked about the Carnival Centre. Our programme of cultural festivals obviously at risk because nothing has happened for 2 years because of COVID, and our collective and individual memories. Also our musical and digital archives. Luton has a lot of them, but they're not then. So I've just given an example of Luton Community Arts Trust and 33 Jazz, but we've got a lot more than that. And our recommendations are using heritage to anchor placemaking with our 5 statutory designated heritage conservation areas and within our 5 emergent heritage interpretation zones. That innovative approaches to heritage interpretation using artificial intelligence, GIS and public art to redress and embed our stories of diaspora and our diversity within all our early stages of capital development, maintaining a dynamic local list to include public art, maintaining a dynamic heritage at risk register to frame our heritage implementation planning, and then the partners, key delivery partners agreeing to sign up to develop the 5-year heritage-led placemaking heritage interpretation and implementation plan, and all the research potentials around that. And then in the intangible heritage, we've already covered a music, art, language, carnival. So our intangibles now just really cover those heritage craft skills and digital archiving. So our major project is digital archive, a strategic approach to digital archive management. So again, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, supporting feasibility or supporting us putting in a bid to support the feasibility around this. Because we have a lot of digital archives and we have a lot of oral archives, and they're not held centrally. Some are at the Imperial War Museum, University of Hertfordshire, University of Leicester. We need to claim them, they need to be managed. Our heritage at risk is learning from previous digital archive projects where things get lost. The risk is when people digitise things, the things themselves get lost. So one of the things we need to address is storage, long-term storage, because if we digitise things, get rid of the things, and then the digitisations get lost, our heritage gets lost. So we'll be looking for a feasibility study to work that out, basically. And then the partnership approach to the feasibility of a modular heritage apprenticeships, the digital archive management, review and strengthening long-term management around our museums policies, research opportunities around how to use digital archive feasibility. So again, the National Lottery Heritage Fund have in the past funded lots of oral history projects. Excuse me, they don't want to keep doing that anymore. They have to do that. They want to see those oral archives being applied and being used to tell the story of place and connectivity. So that's what our aim is. And so that's why we've looked at emergent non-designated heritage zones. We've tried to look at all the heritage and how we might map it across town going forward. St Mary's Heritage Zone is basically, if you imagine our Grade 1 listed church, in the middle, then we've got, which is 850 years, I think, of social history, social and faith history. Then we've got Power Court, which represents 150 years of social history in terms of football. The UK Centre for Carnival Arts, social history, the university, massive institutional social education, cultural history. So that area is a really interesting zone that up till now doesn't exist but will exist. The Hat Industry Heritage Zone is that Plattersley Hat District Station Gateway. The Engineering Heritage Zone, physically we are looking at the airport, and then the airport's at its largest now, and then add to that when Vauxhall was at its largest. So if you look at that as a physical space, that is the site of Luton's engineering innovation and excellence. Then the Riverlea Linear Park is a heritage zone. I think I found this as an idea within the council on parks that went back to 2005, and with the deculverting of the river, this is a really good opportunity over the next 10 years to look at a linear park joining up the river. And then Bury Park as a British Asian heritage zone. So they were the 5 interpretation zones. So I wanted to take a view on those. And then responsibility for delivery. At the moment, we've got we've been involving the University of Bedfordshire, the Wildlife Trust, the Chiltern Conservation Board, the Culture Trust, and Luton Heritage Forum, who have been receiving development funding around governance and structure. So that's it. And that's basically that's the logos. And next step. So after the strategy, we would be looking at reviewing it in 2 years' time, because we've got a lot of 2-year heritage funded projects then dovetailing, developing our placemaking heritage implementation plan, and developing our delivery ecosystem, which will include a network of heritage ambassadors. And that ecosystem is a steering group, very similar to the arts and culture steering group, and then a delivery ecosystem of delivery partners on the ground. So I'm really asking for views on the framework, on the recommendations, on everything that I've asked for. Your views in
Before I open it up to questions, Lee, on page 40, the top line on your documentation, it says the Neolithic enclosure at Wallard's Bank at Marsh Farm, and then Leagrave Ward. Now, the locals refer to Marsh Farm as the area that Wallard's Bank Neolithic comes within Sundon Park Ward.
Does it?
Yes, because Wallard's Bank Drive, one side Sundon Park and the other side is Northwell. Lots of people make that mistake because of Leagrave Park, which isn't in Leagrave, it's in Sundon Park.
Right, thank you for pointing that out for me. I drive up that road quite regularly.
Yeah, as I say, Leagrave Park, people think that's in Leagrave, but it's not, it's in Sundon. And the Neolithic enclosure Wallard's Bank is in Sundon Park as a ward. Thank you.
Correct that. Thank you.
Right. Questions? Councillor Franks?
Yeah, there is a question, but first of all, if I could just very quickly rattle through a few things that I think might be missed opportunities. I'll rattle quickly through them because it really won't take long. You've mentioned Cowslip Meadow, but I don't see any mention of the Bradgers Hill Nature Conservation Area, Warden Hill, the Farley Fish Pond. People laugh when I say that. Farley Fish Pond could be a very much more important feature than it currently is. The Dallow Hills and, of course, our own beloved Wigmore Valley Park. When we come to the industrial heritage, of course, there's no denying the importance of Vauxhall, but Vauxhall's not the only motor manufacturer that successfully operated in Luton for many, many years. We had the Commer Cars factory, for example, in Biscott Road, making lorries, vans and buses very successfully. And not to mention the fact that everybody says, yeah, we had Electrolux making fridges. There were 2 fridge factories in Luton. There was another one in Dallow Road making fridges under various brands, including Morphy Richards and English Electric. And of course, Kent Meters. There are a lot. What I'm really saying is there are a lot more engineering companies.
And Skef.
And of course, Skef. Yeah. Thank you for that. You talk about the Bury Park being the British Asian Heritage Zone. Let's not forget that the low-cost housing, or relatively low, nothing in housing is low cost these days, but relatively low-cost housing of the Bury Park and Dallow Road area were magnet many years before the British Asian groups started moving in. The 1920s, they were occupied by huge numbers of migrants from London. In the 30s, it was people from Wales, from Scotland, and from the northeast. At the time, my own parents came actually from the northeast. The Irish, the Caribbeans, and the East Europeans, of course, more recently. Many of whom may have been frightened off by Brexit, but quite a lot of them haven't, thank goodness. The last point I want to make here is on page 57, there's a reference to the burning down of the town hall when the building was gutted and civic documents destroyed. It might be interesting to note that not all of the civic documents were in fact destroyed. I was having a rummage round in the basement of the new town, this town hall, about 10 years or maybe a bit more ago, and I came across some leather-bound ledgers, some of which were accounts books and some of them were minutes books and all sorts of other stuff, with quite serious burning around the edges. And they found, I hope they found their way, they were intended to find their way into the museum. They're believed to be documents that were salvaged from the burning building. So that's just a point that may be worth investigating. But what I really want to say is, I think this document represents the best chance we've ever had of taking advantage of and getting the best out of town's heritage. I thank Lily and all of the team and Sinead for the huge amount of work that's gone into it. And I hope that, in fact, the council manages to make best use of it because it's a very valuable document, very valuable indeed. So thank you for it. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
I'd like to again congratulate you on the hard work you put into this. There's one, it's just a suggestion, not a suggestion, it's just a comment. Probably the best thing that Luton Borough Council ever did to educate people on the heritage happened in the 1960s. When Luton became a county borough, James Dyer wrote The Story of Luton. He wrote the book The Story of Luton. And when I was at school, because the county borough ran the schools, we had to learn in 1 year the history of Luton as our history in a primary school. And when we left primary school, we were each given The Story of Luton as a book. And so many people my age all still have a copy of The Story of Luton. That book, as I'm aware, has never been updated. It's not been updated to cover the influx of people that have come to make Luton their home and all the things that have happened since 1964 to this town. I would just think, I don't know whether we could get a grant to get somebody to rewrite that book. The other thing is, when it was distributed to the people, to the children leaving primary school to go to secondary school, it was paid for by Vauxhall Motors. So a local company actually paid every year for everyone to receive that book. And it, you know, it's a shame that we don't control the curriculum or whatever, but I just think something about education in schools. You know, we would talk about Wallows Bank, we would talk about the hat factories, we would talk about all of that as part of the history. So that's one thing that I would wonder whether we could look at, whether that could be part of this project. Just on, you mentioned the football club and the history of the football club. One of the things that I wonder whether we could be suggested is that whether in their plans for Power Court could be included a physical museum of that heritage. If you go to Preston North End have a fantastic museum attached to their ground, which lots of people go to when they're travelling to that club. It has the history of football in it. Again, that's another way of drawing people into a town centre and maintaining history. So that may be something that could be discussed with the football club, because there's a lot of work being done by the heritage group there. So that's, I wonder whether that could be included. There were a couple of areas that I thought maybe we could put more emphasis on, or not more emphasis on, but look at. One is women's history. Luton has always had, I don't know if you know, Luton has always had a history of having far more women than men. Probably not now, but certainly for hundreds of years, because of the hat factory and a number of other reasons, and the amount of people killed in the First World War, there are always more women. And women in Luton earned their own living to a far higher proportion than in other places. And there was a real culture of women in the hat factories, women in those areas. So women's history, I wonder if that could slightly be looked at. The other one that I didn't hear you mention was the history of the LGBT community in Luton. Luton has had a very long history of LGBT community, a traceable history, which I again think could be maybe investigated further. And the other area that I think we could look at is particularly the musical heritage. It worries me that we have had a very strong musical heritage, which is lost. Just to give you just one example, Luton is the only place in the south of England to ever have a brass band that won the World Championship. It's the only place. No other town in the south of Britain has ever achieved it. And yet that history is just disappearing. The archives that went with that brass band, all the music, all the pictures, I don't know what happened to them, where they've gone. The same with the Luton Girls Choir, was probably the most famous choir in the 1950s internationally. Just lost that history, really. I just worry about the musical history of the town. Again, people just don't know about it. They haven't had the chance. And I still think it's really good. I'm not criticising. I just think there are some other areas that we could probably focus on. But the big one, as I said, is there some way every child in Luton can be given the story of the town that you live in, updated to cover what it is today? I think it would mean lots of people have got it at my age, have still got it in their bookshelf at home with the paging, and it meant something. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Chowdhury.
Thank you, Chair. Just for quick comments and one question as well. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your hardworking and comprehensive report. And I'm pleased to see that we got some funding for the heritage. We're proud of our heritage. I just like to add, what our fellow councillor said about the museum. I'm wondering whether we can merge these our existing museum and football museum together and make this museum more efficient, more self-sustaining, as we investing a lot of money, I believe, in the museum. And I think it's if we do something new, something different, to self-sustain, probably is going to be best idea. And I also want to know a bit more about when you say in the report, Bury Park, British Asian Heritage. So what, apart from the dance you mentioned, what else is included in there? Can you give us some more details, please? Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, what did you? Oh, I'm echoing. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, what did you mean by what else is included? Did you mean in the Bury Park in terms of in terms of heritage assets, or?
Yeah, that's right. Is there buildings, or is there culture, or what else is there? Is there any specific buildings are included, or?
Well, if I had my way, I would make Bury Park a designated conservation area, because we actually have 3 listed buildings, including the church. But we have some really I was having a conversation earlier about the mosque, the purpose-built mosque. It's not the first in Britain because the one in Regent's Park was, but Sheffield haven't their mosque nationally listed, and our mosque was built before this. Sorry, and it was built, by the people. So actually, there's a huge, as well as being on a local list. I think that's possibly worthy of looking at a statement on a national list. The interesting building in Bury Park Road has a map that it was one of the most interesting buildings, but it isn't listed. The locally listed again would just be the outside. Is now the Islamic Centre, and that's interesting because of its amazing history. So if you go back in time, it's an Islamic centre. Then before that it was a synagogue. Before that, it was a cinema. Before that, in the war, it was private confidential. I'm sure we'll find that. I think it was to do with propeller and aeroplane parts, because before that, it manufactured aeroplane parts. I mean, that one building pretty much tells the story of. But the reason we're looking at it, the area as a British Asian success story, we've got a huge demographic. Over 67% of Dallow and Biscuit people of Asian descent. We've got this famous, we're nationally, probably internationally renowned for the film Blinded by the Light. We've got, what else have we got? We've got cafes that were the first Bangladesh cafes and the first groups of so 50 years ago, so this year is Bangladesh 50, but those movements that were also started in Bury Park. There's huge amounts of heritage in Bury Park. So that's what we were trying to capture in zoning, again with the engineering. So I realised that engineering, innovation and excellence was town-wide and not just in, within the area of the airport and Vauxhall, and certainly wasn't just about Vauxhall. But in the government in terms of planning and the government in terms of heritage and the funding bodies really keen on zoning, and zoning helps us connect people with place in a very direct way. So so I'm digressing again, but for the industrial heritage, if we were going to map all of our engineering, innovation and excellence, we can map it across town, and there's no reason we shouldn't. But obviously, there's a huge amount of mapping in those particular areas. And likewise with Bury Park, we could map all kinds of heritage and listed buildings in that area, which we're not going to forget. But it's massively culturally a British Asian success story, and on the map for an international film. So the zones are really, they're not about excluding things. They're really just about focusing our connectivity between people and place. They're not about forming ghettos. They're about just how can we interpret these areas. And actually in our interpretation development, we will find other layers within those layers across town. I don't know if that's answered your question. I wanted to come back and answer some points from Councillor Chapman, if I may. I did mention Luton Girls Choir in the Heritage Strategy. This is the first time I've heard that we had an award-winning brass band. In terms of women's history and LGBT, I didn't explicitly do any primary research and consultation around it. But I'm hoping, obviously, we've got development stage and implementation, interpretation, planning, and that's where we've got the strategic priority, embedding diaspora and embedding diversity in all our narratives. So that will no doubt be picked up in there. Could Power Court include a physical museum? I have been talking to Luton 2020 and Hatters Heritage. They do, the Power Court, they intend to have something in the stadium. Could we build on that? Again, our implementation planning needs to address that. Farley Fish Pond, I thought actually that's part of the parkland, so we're looking at, I can include that in, we need to look at the historic parkland in a Stockwood Park master plan. The Bradgers Hill and Galley Hill are in the strategy, and thank you for the correction on Wallace Bank in Thunder Park. I just stuck it in the wrong ward, sorry. Yeah, I hope that, does that address, Councillor Chowdhury, your question?
Is there any chance of the book being...
Sorry?
Is there any chance of the story of Luton being rewritten and updated?
Well, we can certainly include it in the implementation plan and look at how we might include it in our next implementation development bid going forward. But I can't promise that it can be delivered, but we can certainly look at that.
Good.
Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Lily, for this report. I've got a question in regards of embedding diaspora and diversity in heritage interpretation. We all know Luton is a super diverse town. We got, if I'm not wrong, 40 to 45% or 50% people living in this town are from different communities. Asian, European, or Afro-Caribbean, all sort of communities. In this report, we haven't seen, I know you just mentioned here in your target outcomes that you will embed diaspora and diversity into all parts of the heritage implementation plan. But in terms of this, I'm just going to mention a few things which I think you should consider. All the places of worship in Luton town, they are here from last 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. I'm not that old, so I can't say how long they are here from. Mosques, gurdwaras, temples, and also people from all other communities. They brought their culture, languages, etc. in this country in town, and also experiences and skills which they are using here in different areas, in businesses, in so many things. I can give you examples, two main examples of this. What I'm talking about is Luton Mela is one of the largest, biggest Mela ever, not in Luton, but all over in Europe. And Asian community always go and show themselves every year. And also Luton Carnival, where Afro-Caribbean community, not just Afro-Caribbean community, but all the communities, diaspora from all over Luton, they go there and show themselves every year. So I think we need to consider that in our report for future.
Okay, thank you. I hope I have covered most of that in the extended full version, except experiences and skills. So places of worship, yeah, I covered it, but probably not as in depth as it needs covering. And culture and languages, again, I did say that our Heritage at Risk is our programme of festivals because of COVID. We've lost our programme of festivals. So that isn't going on the at-risk register, so that the Mela and the Carnival will be, you know, priority in terms of cultural heritage. Experiences and skills probably need a much deep dive of research. I think, thank you for raising this. What we need to do in our implementation planning for our heritage interpretation is really take a deeper look at all of these issues. Definitely, I will try and go back and insert them in the full document.
Councillor Hussain.
Yes, thank you very much. I think one of the points I was going to make has been covered already by my colleague, Councillor Malik. But on the point of heritage, it's a great document and a strategy. So, you know, many congratulations to you on the team of officers that have worked so hard to get us this far. For me, Luton's heritage is about its people and the transformation that we've made from a town into, you know, the rich and cultural diversity that we have. I mean, just a quick example, like my family settled in Dallow, arrived in and settled in Dallow, I should say, it was in the 1960s and 70s. So for me, it's important to ensure that as part of our heritage strategy, we're also including narratives, you know, stories, life stories from the people that actually live in Luton. I'm pretty certain there's families out here, you know, in Luton that have actually been here for a long time and that can tell us, you know, how Luton's evolved over the years, because that's rich information there. And on the point of festivals, you know, it's really important to recognise that our festivals are a very important part of our heritage. For example, if I just give the example of Lutamela, that started off as a street festival in Borough Park, and it was all about bringing the Southeast Asian cultures together, and obviously, you know, sharing that culture with the rest of the town. And there's a little known fact that there's one really world famous singer who's no longer with us actually appeared and actually performed at Borough Park Street Festival, and you know his name resonates around the world. I mean, that's Ustad Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. I mean, he's one of the biggest maestros and the biggest influencers of Sufi music, but obviously he's no longer here. But he actually came to Luton and performed. So I'm pretty certain, you know, it's these sorts of, you know, tiny examples that we have in our, you know, music and in our cultural heritage for our, you know, obviously for our festivals that are really important, and they have a fascinating history, obviously in themselves. So it's, you know, well worth exploring those, and obviously making sure that our heritage actually does include, you know, our cultures and our festivals, because they are a very important part of our town, and you know they are our pride as well. Thank you.
Councillor Moore, you had a question.
Yeah, David made the point about Preston's Museum and the possibility of that park. I was just wondering whether there was any kind of plans to kind of enshrine something that I've seen at other places where new grounds have been built, where at the place of the old ground there's some kind of memorial grandfathered into whatever plans of building there is at Kenilworth Road, not just obviously because it's one of the oldest football grounds in the country, but there's plenty of other things that have happened in Kenilworth Road. There's been plenty of other sports played there, like American football and such. It's hosted the first ever European Women's Championship final, which is something I don't think too many people know. Or certainly the second leg of the final anyway. It wasn't quite as similar. But I just wondered if and I know places like Arsenal's old ground is, all the houses are built in a way that makes it kind of almost look like the old ground, even excluding the marble halls. I think places like Sunderland have like a statue of a football on where the old centre spot. I mean, there's lots of different things you could do, and it doesn't have to be major parts of whatever development goes into where the old stadium was whenever the time comes to redevelop that site.
Really, I think that's a good idea. Would it come under your remit?
Well, one of the things I'm really keen is using heritage to anchor regeneration and planning. But obviously, that's really difficult, but that's where planning and cultural heritage meet. But yes, definitely. I'm going to check the long document because I thought we did address, but then I'm thinking perhaps it's not in there about, it's all very well talking about Power Court moving, but what's going to happen? How do we, demarcate what was there? Is a really important point. We'll try our best to. Yeah.
Thank you. This is the last question.
I just wanted to make a comment because I've spent time listening to Lily and her team talking about this before. I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of the work that she's been doing. I think it's been excellent. I think that what we need to do going forward is to try and make sure we actually follow through on some of the ideas that she's putting forward in a very active way. And we don't let the initiative that she started go.
Thank you, David. Right. Thank you very much for the presentation. How you managed to get through it all without having to stop for 5 minutes. But the report is really, really good. And I echo what Councillor Wynne says, this is a very good document as a starting document, and hopefully we'll carry forward what's in this document. And if you need any help, come back to OSB.
Thank you. So in terms of everything we're asking for in the report and recommendations,
is everybody quite happy with the recommendations? I think the main one is the change of name, name change to it, wasn't it? That one. Everybody's happy. Thank you. As again, thank you very much for this excellent report.
Councillor Pedestin, could I just clarify that we will bring back the implementation plan when it's ready for sign off? We will bring it back, so you'll feel part of that, and we'll report on that regularly to OSB. So hopefully that will show the continued momentum and journey we're going to take.
Yes, that would definitely help us in that respect. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
The next part is overview and scrutiny board work programme and executive forward plan. Are there any items from the work programme or executive forward plans that are of interest to the board? A report on low traffic neighbourhood trial Luton model has been added to the OSB November meeting. Yes, David.
I'd just like to suggest that that more and more towns are introducing bans on estate agents' boards. I wouldn't mind adding to the work programme a report on what Luton can do about that.
Well, we can add to it, but we'll add that one, please. We've got one last. That's that finished. If nobody has any other things that they want to add to the thing. Now I've got to go into private.